Okay, we'll give it another couple minutes. Looks like we're kind of light on students today, so another minute or two.
Oh, that's what it's from? Yeah. Oh.
All right, we'll get going. Who's expecting to do a presentation today? Luke is, anybody else? No? Okay. All right, so if you have practice problems for chapter 9, turn them in. They're due today. We'll continue on with Tuesday, turning the practice problems in. So next week, I think they'll probably be chapter 10.
Midterms next week.
Oh, is midterm next week?
Yeah.
Maybe let's look at the schedule, make sure I'm not getting confused here. Yeah, because we're a week behind. Yeah, so midterm is actually the 24th, next Thursday. Well, let's talk about that midterm. So the midterm is on paper. It's to be several true false type questions and then several short answer questions, very similar to the practice problems. I actually won't be here on the 24th. I have a proctor coming in to pass out the tests and watch you guys and then collect them. But it should be straightforward. If you've done the practice problems, shouldn't be anything unfamiliar. On next Tuesday, we'll do a little review. Not a whole lot. The review for the most part is the practice problems. So if you've been doing those, and then for your study guide, go back and look at the practice problems and the solutions to get an idea of how to do the problems. So I guess practice problems 10, it was supposed to be due this week, but we're a week behind. So still get them in because there will be problems on the midterm from chapter 10. So I need you to have experience with doing those problems. So we'll do those next Tuesday, collect them. I've been flexible with the collecting the practice problems, but if you haven't gotten them turned in before, week 9 was due today, 9 and below, or excuse me, chapter 9 and below, due today. I'll still take them for partial credit, but no more flexibility. We should be all on track now. So going forward, Tuesday morning, have them ready, and after that, partial credit. Okay. Let's see, anything else? I don't think we have any other housekeeping. So let's get into the lecture today. So let's talk about savings. So I think I teased this a little bit last week. Savings is investment. So in an economy, savings is investment. So how does that work? Well, essentially, unless you're saving by putting your money under your mattress, it's going someplace that works as an investment, a bank account, buying stocks, buying bonds. All those are ways for the financial system to put money into investment. So what is investment spending? Well, it's using other people's money to invest in yourself, essentially. So that's what you do when you're investing. You're borrowing money to buy something. Build a factory, expand your factory. Personally, you do it to buy a car. Right? You're borrowing money to buy something for yourself, and then you pay back that money. All right. One of the fundamental assumptions of economics is that savings is the same thing as investment spending. So for all our math and for this class, they're the same. So how do they get there? This is actually kind of, my eyes glaze over at this slide. But if you follow it in the book, it's kind of interesting, but essentially using the standard equation for GDP, which is consumer spending plus investment spending plus government spending plus imports minus exports, no, exports minus imports equals GDP. So if you break that down and you break it down to, you eliminate in the export side of it for simplicity, and you look at, there's only two things to do with money and for GDP: spending, which is C and G, and investment. So if you eliminate spending, there's only one thing left to do with money, and that's savings and investment. And then they do all this complicated subtracting and adding things to get to the final result that savings equals investment. All right. I don't know. This is the publisher's way, the book author and publisher's way of getting there. I think is a convoluted way. Here's what it all comes down to. There's only two things you can do with money. You can spend it, you can save it. When you save it, unless you're pulling it out of the economy, like putting it into a jar, your cash in a jar or in your mattress, unless you're pulling it out of the economy, saving always is through a way that a mechanism for investment. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about saving, what this all means. So you might be familiar with saving, but having a savings account or having a checking account and not spending all the money in it. Governments can save. It's what our national budget is, or you might hear the national deficit. When the government takes in more than it spends, it's saving, right? And that is a budget surplus. And a budget deficit is when the government is spending more than it's taking in. And then if they're the same, it's balanced budget. Right. And that's how the government works. And then you add that to your own personal savings and the savings of private entities, you have the national savings. So the national savings is all the total savings of you and, Microsoft and, nonprofits and every entity out there, private entity. You add that to the savings rate of the government, and you get the national savings. Economics, we always have to have a bunch of formulas. So the government savings rate, S government, is equal to tax minus tax spending. Is that what that is? The value of government, government transfers. Tax minus transfers minus government spending. Right, transfers are Social Security, things like that, where the government takes money from some people and gives it to another. And then if you look at what the national savings rate is, it's this for the government plus the savings rate for private. And then as another reminder, savings equals investment. I heard somebody's phone ding and I wondered if it was mine. So I was just checking to make sure mine was silent. All right. So before we move on, I don't know if this is makes sense or not. So let me just see if there's any confused looks and faces. So does savings equal investment make sense to you guys? Yeah. Is there anything else you could do with money besides spend it or save it? Not really. And we're going to get to more of the banking system in this class, but if you don't understand it yet, can you just think about what you do when you save money? Every way you save money is a mechanism for that money to be used somewhere else. So your bank doesn't hold on to your cash. If you have money in a savings account, they do stuff with it. And that stuff is the equivalent of investment. Okay, so as a reminder from last week, we have 3 different types of capital. Physical is things that are physical. Laptop, car, building. Capital means money, so it's things that you spend money, physical things you spend money on. Human capital is investing into a human, so through education, skills training. And then financial capital is the funds from savings that are available for investment spending. So I guess it's pretty easy to think of savings and spending inside a country, but it works across borders. So spending is a little bit harder. So spending is exporting and importing, right? Because you're spending, you're buying something. So you have to send it across the ocean or across the border. Capital, money, doesn't have that limitation in a digital age. I can buy right now, I can get on Japanese stock market and buy a stock. Money is really easy to flow in and out of borders. And that flow is calculated as your net capital inflow. So you take how much money is going out of your country and how much money is coming into your country, and you have a net. Happening in Africa right now, Chinese investors are buying a lot of, investing a lot of into Africa for the natural resources. So what does that mean? They invest in the companies, they send money over to build infrastructure. We have a lot of investment in the United States from foreign investors because we're seen as a safe investment. So that would be investing in our stock market, in our bonds, buying into businesses, buying into investment homes. Yeah, another really, I think it's kind of a stretch how I like so much in this book, but this chapter, I really think it's a stretch how they do the logic here, they have to get there. But their end result here is that our investment spending is equal to our national savings, which we already decided was the savings of the government, so the budget deficit or budget surplus, plus private spending, right? And then we can add net capital inflow. So if people are getting rich in China, which they are, and they want to take that money out of China and put it someplace safer or with higher returns, and they send it over here into our stock market or other investments, we add that. That's benefit, net benefit for us in the United States. So that's as to our investment spend. Likewise, if like I said, I can get right now and buy a stock in the Japanese stock market. And it's really easy with digital money transfers. That would be adding to the Japanese investment spending. Oops, wrong button. I don't know if I understand the point of this diagram, but let's just break it down really quick. So United States versus Germany, right? Investment spending. And you can see our savings rate, how it makes up compared to what Germany does. So the bulk of it's private savings, right? And then we have a much larger capital inflow than Germany. So this is all foreign investment into the United States. On the other hand, Germany runs a budget surplus in their government spending. We don't in the United States. We run a budget deficit. And then you can see that here is that here's the budget, huge budget deficit below the line right here. All right, and then Germany has these huge capital outflows. All right, we have net inflow, and Germany is investing in other countries more than they are their own country. Okay. So remember, this is all greatly simplified for this class. But how does this all work in practice? Well, it all works through financial markets. Now, in reality, financial markets are really complex beasts. We're talking about the various stock markets. We're talking about the various ways to buy bonds or sell bonds. We're talking about commodity markets. We're talking about the banking system. These are all channels in financial markets. For this class, we're just going to simplify and say the financial market. But that is the way in which money transfers through households to businesses, to other businesses, back to households. So in one of the first chapters, we had the diagram, the big circular diagram, where we focused on wages from households to businesses or business to households, and we focused on buying, spending. Right? But the other side was this financial market side, how much it completes the circle. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the structures, the infrastructure set up to take money and get it from people that want to save and people that want to invest and get it to people that will take that money and do something productive with it. And then they'll pay it back to the savers. Okay, so one of the most common relatable ways that this works is loans. Everyone borrows money, people borrow money, companies borrow money. So we can call that a loanable funds market, which would include your bank. You get a car loan, your mortgage. It would include a business loan. It would include a $10 million physical capital loan to build a factory. And the determining factor here of this loan is the interest rate. Nominal interest rate. We learned all about before nominal versus real. Nominal doesn't take into consideration inflation. All the paperwork you get when you borrow a loan, what the APR is and what the numbers you're using in your head are almost always going to be nominal. They're never the real. So when we're talking in this chapter, we're going to talk nominal. Okay. All right. So back to one of these graphs from chapter 3. Downward. So this is demand line, demand curve. And then our axis, we have interest rate and we have quantity of loanable funds. So it should be very similar. Interest rate is the loan term for price, right? So price and quantity. You know, interest rates are price. And this should be make a lot of sense here. When interest rates are high, quantity demanded is low. When interest rates go down, the quantity demanded goes way up. Right? Makes a lot of sense. If I can buy a car right now and take out a loan at 3%. So I'll take out a $60,000 loan, buy myself a nice Tesla. But if that interest rate was 12% and I had to have a car, I'm going to buy a Kia because they don't want, because the payment's going to be so high, the high interest rate. So I demand less funds. All right, and this works for businesses too. Are you going to borrow money as a business to add on the factory if the interest rate's high? Well, no, because you're going to run your calculations internally and you're going to see that building the factory is going to increase your profit by 10%. But if the interest rate you have to pay to borrow that money is 12%, you're going to lose money on this deal. So you don't want to borrow that money. Okay, and when we talk about demand, it's important to understand present value. This is a concept you also learn in any finance classes you take, but it's an economics concept as well. So $1 today is more valuable than $1 tomorrow. Anybody know why? Yeah.
Doesn't inflation cause the power of the dollar to decrease?
Yes, that is absolutely right, but wrong as well. And let me explain why. So, and it's really confusing because we just spent a whole chapter learning about inflation. And then in this chapter, we're going to say inflation does not matter. For present value, inflation doesn't matter because the actual value of $1 is more valuable today than it is next year. Is that today I can use it to buy lunch, right? I can't, next year I can't use it to buy lunch today, right? So that's kind of the weird thing about present value, about the analysis, is that what makes $1 more valuable today is I have more options today than $1 a year from now. I have less options today if I get it a year from now. So how do we think about present value? Is if I need $1,000 in a year, then there's two things I need to know if I'm an investor or a saver. And those things are, how much money do I need today and how much interest will I earn in the next year? So I need $1,000 in 1 year. So you'll notice in this equation, and why I said that was a wrong answer about inflation, although in reality it's the perfect answer, is we don't care about inflation. We care about, I want $1,000 in a year. I need to know what my return is going to be, what the interest rate I'm going to earn, and how much money I need today. So it's a very simple calculation. Today's principal times 1 plus the interest rate. So if I have $909 today, and I can find an investment that pays me 10% in 1 year, that's what this example is, then I only need for $909 plus times 1 plus 1.10, right? Gets me to $1,000. All right. So these kind of calculations you'll learn all about when and if you take a finance class. This is half the exercises in most finance classes, figuring out present value and future value. But the idea, the concept is, when it comes to investing, you need to know the 3 pieces of information are what you have today, what the return is, and then what you'll have after you get that return. Okay. So we looked at the demand curve. Let's look at the supply curve. Goes up, just like every other supply curve. Again, same graph. Interest rate, which is the equivalent of price when it comes to loanable funds, and then the quantity. So who is the supply? Who's supplying savings / investment? Who are we talking about here? Okay. Sure, yeah. Anybody else? Where do banks get their money?
People.
Yeah, this is you. And this is businesses that are investing, but this is you as well. What are you going to do with your money? If I have 10 grand that I don't need to spend in the next couple of days, I can put it in the stock market and maybe get a 10% return. I can put it in the bank and maybe get a 1% return. Right? But it's all coming from me, from people, from households, or from businesses that are in investment activities. Almost every business is in an investment activity, but it's not their primary. So if you look at like the balance sheet of a business, it'll have their main operating revenue, which is from whatever they do. They make widgets, right? They sell widgets. But then they might have another area of revenue that's from investment because they made so much money and they're not going to just let it sit in a pile. So they invest it too. So this is that as well. So you as an investor / saver, you want to invest more as it goes up. So right now I have 10 grand and I'm trying to decide between a cruise to Alaska and putting money in a savings account. I'm going to think, well, the savings account is only paying 0.01 interest a year. So I don't really care about saving much. I'm going to spend it on a cruise. But then I look at, the stock market is growing at 12% a year. Maybe I don't need a cruise that bad. I'm going to make 12% of my money. So I'll put all that 10 grand in there. Or, maybe I look at Bitcoin and Bitcoin's growing at 40,000%. I'll put it in there. And the next day lose it all because it's the most volatile market there is. Yeah, so and it's stating the obvious here. Why does the supply go up? Because the more money you can make on your money and your investment, the more you want to invest. Okay, and then when you combine them together, you get the financial market, the simplified market. Simplified market is the equilibrium point where all interest rates come from, is the equilibrium point between what borrowers are demanding and what suppliers, savers are willing to supply. So investment rates and rates of return, the interest rate, are all supply and demand. That surprise anybody? Did anybody follow the news and heard that the Fed's going to raise interest rates this next month? How could that be? If it's all supply and demand, what's the Fed doing? Well, we're going to learn about that after spring break. But the Fed is setting one particular interest rate. It is not setting market rates. Market rate, all the rates that you have access to buy stocks, or if what bank account you choose to put your money into, that's all set by supply and demand. So there's some implications that the book is trying to point out here. So remember, the demand part is going to be mostly business investing, borrowing money to build a new factory. And they're willing to borrow a lot more as the interest rates go down, and they're willing to borrow a lot less as interest rates come up. So what is the implication to that? Well, if the interest rate is above equilibrium point, meaning a higher interest rate, then they're only going to fund these, they're only going to borrow these funds if they're working on a project that they're expecting above average profitability. So if the equilibrium interest rate is 8%, they're paying 8% a year to borrow this money, they're only going to borrow money for any time they can make more than 8%. Vice versa, if they can borrow money less, then they're going to borrow a lot more money, and they're going to borrow money for investment in projects that are less profitable. Okay. So that whole curve can shift, just like we learned from supply and demand. So just like we did for supply and demand, this only shows you the effect on quantity demanded with a change of interest rate. It does not show you anything else. So if there's any factor that is not a change in interest rate or a change in quantity demanded, it doesn't show you. But just like supply and demand, there's outside forces to interest rate that will affect this graph. And those cause a shift in the whole curve. And those reasons are many, but the few the book talks about are changes in perceived business opportunities and changes in government borrowing. So remember, this is businesses demanding to borrow money. Some things will cause them to shift way to the right. The book uses the perfect example. This was the internet boom in the 90s. This new technology came around, the internet. People realized that it was going to completely change everything. So businesses started borrowing money at every interest rate to take advantage of that, because no one understood what the actual opportunity was. So they borrowed money to build out infrastructure, they borrowed money to build new businesses. And it didn't matter the interest rate. At every interest rate, they demanded more money. Okay. The other change is changes in government borrowing. Okay, so what's government borrowing? Well, every time the government runs a deficit, They spend $1 trillion, but they only took in 750 billion. They have to borrow 250 billion. They don't get to borrow that money for free unless you want to give them some money. That's called taxes, right? But the rest of they borrow, right? Typically borrow through treasury bills, which have a very low interest rate, but interest rate nonetheless. And this, when the government is doing the borrowing, people love to give them money. Because is the US government ever not going to pay you back? Every year, Congress threatens to not pay you back with the debt ceiling, but they always do. All right. So crowding out means that when there's only so much money available for savings and investing, and when the government borrows money, too much money, they're crowding out other people that want to borrow because people will lend to the government first. Okay, I think we'll stop there. On Thursday, we'll come back in at that crowding out concept and then talk about other shifts and the Fisher effect and all that. All right, let's take a 5-minute break. 1:36. Let's get back into it. So I did not have our screen shared for the Zoom, so I hope they were able to somewhat see the presentation.
I can see it.
Okay, good.
I don't see it in our projector.
Oh, no. One or the other, I guess, today. Projector or the screen share. There we go. We're gonna have Luke come up and do his presentation. Let me just get it better on the screen.
What's the map?
All right, the screen's all yours. And I often, it's funny, easy, just hit that little down arrow to go from one slide. Cool.
Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about what's the matter with Italy. Not just Italy itself, but its real GDP. Just really quick little history lesson about Italy's economy. In the early 20th century, Italy was a very poor country in need of economic growth. It became so poor that in the 1920s, right before World War II, many people began to immigrate to the United States and other countries to find a better life. Italy did not see economic growth until the end of World War II. After World War II, it was an exponential real GDP growth from 1950 to 1990. As you can see on the graph right here, it passed the United Kingdom in around the late 1960s, which was just a big accomplishment for Italy, and a lot of people were surprised about how much it was growing. But the growth began to stunt around 1990 to 2000. And it was around the time where we saw a lot of technological growth. The reason why Italy's growth became stunted economically was, Italy, one, had a low birth rate. So a lot of the working class percentage was going down because not a lot of people were replacing the people who were getting too old to work. Italy also lacked on the educational scale. In all of the EU, they had the lowest rate of college educated people per capita. As well as Italy also had seen a decline in productivity growth since the early 2000s. And it was due to the way Italian business managers tend to set up their business models. The reason behind that was Italian managers tended to value seniority over productivity. So it didn't lead to a lot of incentives, and a lot of people just decided well, I don't have to work that hard. I've been with this company for X amount of years, so why should I work? Or why should I change to this new model? A lot of Italian businesses also didn't adapt, like computers, a lot of new technological advances, so they saw the economical decline. And so that's the matter of Italy. And for my second presentation today, I want to talk about our economies converging. So right here, just looking at the graph really quick, kind of get a quick understanding. First, I want to talk about graph A. Long ago in the 1950s, Europe, Japan, Italy, all these cities you think of today as being kind of the same as America, established metropolitan areas, they're very poor. But they look like New York today, even though their GDP is still off of what America's is. And this is because of the convergent hypothesis. The convergent hypothesis means that poor countries should have a higher growth GDP over time. As you can see here from 1955 to 2015, the US has stayed stagnant around 2% growth, whereas Japan, Ireland, and Spain hit around the 3 to 4% range. And this is because they should be growing. They're the ones that were poorer starting off right after World War II, for obvious reasons. And the United States, although they still saw economic growth, it was less of, so that the other country could catch up. In 1955, the richest had the slowest rate, and Japan, Ireland, and Spain had the highest from them. But that's not true for all. As you can see in graph B, places like Africa, Eastern Europe, Western Asia, Western Europe, and other countries on there all saw a slower rate of growth. Western Europe may have had a higher GDP per capita than Latin America, and that was actually contrary to the convergence theory, because they shouldn't have seen growth. They should have seen an equal growth because they both started lower. But this was because of outside factors. As you can see with all these countries here who did not see a growth like Japan, Ireland, and Spain, it's because other factors affect the convergence theory, excuse me. So that's why it's still seen to be true today. It should happen, but other outside factors are the reason why other countries haven't seen this growth. Thank you.
All right, great. Hey. I hope I didn't steal any of your thunder on those two, because I spent a lot of time on that graph during the lecture. If I remembered that somebody was doing it, I would have spent less time. It was a good explanation. It was as good or better than mine. Okay, well, we only have one presentation today, so let's do the quiz. And I have a feeling you guys could appreciate some getting out a little early today. Okay. Hold on a second. Let me pull the password up. So it's market, and I'll put it on a Word doc like I normally do.